In this continuous journey, we followed 25 stars who turned fame into a loaded gun. They wrecked homes, shattered bodies, and twisted their own myths into cautionary fables. They were daring, magnetic, sometimes cruel, always combustible. Errol Flynn strode into Hollywood like a cyclone in a velvet cape. He fenced on deck rails, boxed in hotel corridors, and seduced anyone who welcomed the accent that curled like smoke around his words. In court transcripts from 1942, the prosecution quoted him boasting, "I like my whiskey old and my women young." Two underage girls swore it was more than a quip. Flynn faced statutory rape charges, while fan magazines fretted over his picture-perfect grin. Acquittal saved the marquee, but not the legend. By then, rumors swirled of peepholes drilled through his Mulholland mansion so he could watch guests in compromising flashes. An FBI memo, still half-redacted, investigated gossip that he smuggled morphine across Pacific docks, though no indictment stuck. Toward the end, the pirate's swagger wilted inside a bloated shell. At 50, he collapsed aboard a yacht with a drink still sweating in his hand, arteries laced with tropical rot gut. Yet in every bar from Sydney to Lisbon, one can still hear echoes of that devil-may-care laugh, the sound of gasoline poured over reputation. Charlie Chaplin traded silent pratfalls for whispered scandals that shouted louder than any slapstick cymbal crash. Behind the tramp's bowler hat hid a man of insatiable pursuit. His diaries note that youth is the ultimate elixir. At 35, he proposed to Lita Gray, 16, under threat of jail for violating the Mann Act if he refused. She later testified to nights of rage and rooms locked from the outside. Another ingenue, Joan Barry, sued for paternity. Blood tests freed him, yet the judge ordered payments anyway, calling him morally responsible in spirit, if not by biology. J. Edgar Hoover, hungry for a foreign trophy, dubbed Chaplin a propaganda threat and filed 5 volumes of surveillance. When Chaplin sailed to London in 1952 for the premiere of Limelight, the State Department revoked his re-entry permit. He settled on a Swiss hill where cowbells replaced studio bells. In memoirs, he confessed, "I remain a clown who longs for love but attracts only uproar. The laughter we cherish arrived bearing teeth." Robert Mitchum sauntered across movie screens with half-closed eyes that seemed to measure the world's worth in smirks. Off-camera, his indifference sharpened into menace. At a Laurel Canyon bungalow in 1948, detectives crashed a marijuana party, found Mitchum puffing by a swimming pool, and marched him off for mug shots he later framed on his living room wall. A reporter asked if jail had scared him straight. He exhaled smoke and murmured, "It was just like being busted for holding a beer." Bar fights followed destination shoots like stray dogs. He once split a director's lip in Mexico after a dispute on lens size, then calmly returned for the next take before the blood dried. In Santa Barbara, he flipped his convertible and crawled out with a laugh, saying, "The only difference between me and my characters is I don't shoot people." Danger drifted off him like aftershave, and audiences inhaled. Marlon Brando erupted onto Broadway with a cry of Stella that rattled rafters, but his private thunder shook harder. Lovers arrived in streams, male and female, welcomed by an actor who claimed he had no skin, only nerves. He smashed mirrors between takes, demanded rewrites mid-shoot, and once filled producer Stanley Kramer's desk drawer with dead fish to protest studio interference. Tragedy stalked him. Son Christian blasted his sister's boyfriend with a revolver at Brando's own house, bullets puncturing gossip pages for months. Daughter Cheyenne spiraled into despair, ending her life beneath Tahitian palms, leaving Brando to whisper, "The only paradise I ever found was lost before I entered. He refused the Oscar for The Godfather, sending Sachin Littlefeather to read a rebuke of Hollywood myths. Even in decline, obese and breathing through regret, Brando could set an entire set trembling with a glance, a reminder that volcanoes never truly die. They merely sleep between eruptions. Clark Gable basked beneath the title King of Hollywood, yet kings often claim what they want. On the snowy set of Call of the Wild, he charmed 22-year-old Loretta Young inside a borrowed Pullman carriage. 9 months later, Young vanished to give birth, then staged an adoption of her own child to avoid scandal. For decades, she called the encounter an affair, until, late in life, she confessed to a friend the word was assault. MGM fixers paid porters, nurses, journalists. Gable carried on, consuming starlets like cigarettes, his grin untarnished. When reporter Adela Rogers St. John's once asked him to list his sins, he winked and said, "Frankly, my dear, I don't recall them all." The line, later echoed in Gone with the Wind, masked truth inside charm. Beneath that mustache lay scars no studio lighting could correct. Spencer Tracy delivered performances so restrained critics called him the everyman's conscience, yet his conscience screamed in solitude. A lapsed Catholic, yet still chained to doctrine, he refused to divorce Louise Treadwell, though love had withered. Instead, he slipped nightly into Katharine Hepburn's bungalow, leaving before dawn so servants could freshen his unused marital bed. Between calls, he scoured hotel bars until voices slurred and fists clenched. Crew members spoke of days when Tracy vanished, returning hollow-eyed yet perfect on take one. He locked himself in dressing rooms, reciting Hail Marys between shots of rye, begging forgiveness from a God he feared would not answer. "I have demons, and they never let me go," he once confided to screenwriter James Lee Barrett over a dim booth at Musso and Frank. 2 weeks after wrapping Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, he slumped at his kitchen table, heart finally weary of the war inside. John Barrymore, christened the Great Profile, lost his reflection to brandy. In 20s, Manhattan he could memorize Hamlet overnight. By the 30s, his tongue tangled in iambic despair. Stagehands for the great man. Votes kept cue cards taller than gravestones, yet he still fumbled lines. He decorated yachts with signed whiskey bills, claiming IOU stands for I own you. When friend Gene Fowler recorded his biography, Barrymore insisted the book smell like booze, or readers would doubt its honesty. He died mid-gossip in 1942, legend says, after reciting Shakespeare to doctors who misunderstood the poetry for delirium tremens. A rumor claims Errol Flynn bribed mortuary staff, propped Barrymore's body in a chair at Flynn's living room, and toasted the corpse. Flynn laughed that Jack always liked a good party. Whether myth or truth, it fits. Barrymore belonged to midnight, even in death. Rosco Arbuckle, called Fatty by fans who howled at his pratfalls, entered the St. Francis Hotel penthouse on Labor Day 1921 with bootleg whiskey and an appetite for revelry. Hours later, actress Virginia Rapp lay writhing, her abdomen ruptured. Hearst papers printed the most graphic theory they could sell. Arbuckle crushed her with his girth during a brutal assault. 3 trials followed, prosecutors waving a shattered Coca-Cola bottle as evidence of unthinkable violation. 12 jurors eventually wrote an apology to Arbuckle, declaring him innocent beyond doubt, but exhibitors banned his pictures. Arbuckle, once a millionaire mentor to Keaton and Chaplin, took to directing under the alias William Goodrich, a cruel joke on his ruined reputation. He signed a comeback contract on a June night in 1933, toasted the promise with a final whiskey, and died in his sleep before sunrise. The scandal kneecapped Hollywood so forcefully that moralists forced the studios into the first production code. Arbuckle became the cautionary ghost peering over every producer's shoulder. George Reeves embodied Superman for post-war children who believed a cape could save anyone. Off-camera, he struggled to save himself. Mistress Toni Mannix, wife of MGM's fixer, Eddie, lavished him with a Spanish-style house and a Jaguar, yet jealousy corroded the arrangement. Neighbors heard arguments like radio dramas through stucco walls. In June 1959, party guests downstairs heard a gunshot upstairs. Reeves lay on his bed, a bullet through his skull, pistol at his feet. Police labeled it suicide within 48 minutes, but powder burns were faint, fingerprints absent, and bruises dotted his body. One witness recalled Eddie Mannix muttering, "No one gets away from me." The case file remains officially closed, though every cape that flutters on screen still casts the riddle of the man who wore it first. Rock Hudson stood 6'4", the embodiment of heterosexual fantasy in pillow talk melodramas. Publicists arranged dates with actresses who giggled on red carpets, while Hudson craved the safety of hidden bars on Melrose Avenue. Talent agent Henry Wilson threatened to replace him with the next farm boy if secrets slipped. Hudson capitulated, marrying Wilson's secretary for a year, then filing quietly for annulment once headlines cooled. In 1984, doctors diagnosed AIDS. Instead of crafting an excuse, Hudson released a statement naming the illness. The revelation detonated myths overnight, linking a beloved idol to a disease the White House barely acknowledged. On his deathbed, he whispered to friend Doris Day, "I never had the freedom to tell the world who I loved." His passing forced the world to listen. Tab Hunter, blonde and bright as a summer fair, found his life storyboarded by Warner Brothers. Studio memos scheduled photo ops with Natalie Wood, then Debbie Reynolds, timing each romance with film premieres. Off-lot, he loved figure skater Ronnie Robertson and later actor Anthony Perkins. In 1955, police raided a gay party in Glendale. Hunter's name hit arrest sheets. Warner executives bribed an editor to bury the item beneath a dog show report, but Hunter's nerves frayed. He sat in his car outside the studio gate, pressing his pulse while a guard offered a cigarette. Decades later, he wrote, "I was trapped in a golden cage with paper bars. Escape looked easy, but would have cost me everything." Long after fame faded, he finally opened that door and walked out in sunlight. Tony Curtis sparkled like a diamond tossed among rhinestones. Behind his Bronx swagger crackled a fuse of cocaine, heroin, and self-absorption. He stored Quaaludes in tic-tac boxes, shared lines with anyone who pronounced his name correctly. On the set of The Last Tycoon, he refused to stand for camera focus, announcing he was higher than the boom pole so the lens could bend to him. Lovers tallied by the dozen, Marilyn Monroe included, though Curtis later compared their featureless coupling to kissing Hitler, perhaps a jab born of rejection or ego. Between stints in rehab, he glued himself to canvases, slathering acrylics in manic nights, confessing, "If I cannot paint, I will bleed." Family fractures mirrored his own. Daughter Jamie Lee Curtis called him a charismatic missile that forgot where home was. In twilight years, he cruised Vegas in a motorized wheelchair, scalp dyed raven, still chasing applause that echoed like coins in a jackpot tray. Mickey Rooney erupted onto screen at 14, then never escaped the boom of applause. Studios calculated that between 1938 and 1942, he earned more than the president. Cash slipped away at racetracks and nightclubs. He wed 8 times, sometimes for weeks. Ava Gardner recalled their honeymoon ended the first night when he sneaked off to meet gamblers. In 1966, mob bookies cornered him in a motel, gun barrels colder than the ice machine, demanding repayment. Rooney said the only thing that saved him was bursting into tears so pitiful the hoodlums pitied him. Late career roles dwindled to cameos, yet he still demanded star dressing rooms. Near 90, he testified before Congress that relatives had stolen millions, leaving him penniless. "I was the biggest star in the world," he rasped. "Now I cannot buy lunch." Childhood fame had been his greatest trick and his longest curse. James Dean lived exactly as his license plates boasted, too fast to live. He carried a racing helmet to dinner parties, quoting Saint-Exupéry about the love of danger. On September afternoon, 1955, he drove his Porsche 550 Spider toward a race in Salinas. Fellow racer Lance Reventlow begged him to truck the car instead. Dean grinned, climbed in, and muttered, "That's all right." Police handed him a speeding ticket at 3:30 p.m. Less than 2 hours later, a Ford coupe turned across his path on Highway 466. Witnesses said the silver car seemed to leap skyward before folding into itself. Dean died with his cigarette still unlit, body intact, neck snapped. Studio handlers airbrushed gossip about his bisexual affairs with producer Rogers Brackett and actor Nick Adams, but diaries emerging years later painted a rebel wrestling more with identity than speed. His death certified him a saint, though the crash left behind only twisted metal and secrets. Warren Beatty transformed seduction into politics. He studied Marx, romanced Capitol interns, and hosted parties where senators sipped champagne while models floated like smoke. Biographer Peter Biskind estimated his bedpost notches at 12,000. Beatty laughed that no census was accurate without time and place. Control made him charismatic, yet lethal. During production of Reds, he refused to allow crew members off-set during lighting tweaks, sometimes locking stages for 12-hour shifts. Cinematographer Vittorio Storaro said Beatty lived inside the camera aperture, closing whenever anyone threatened focus. Hollywood still granted him deity status because box office receipts forgave sin. When he shocked tabloids by marrying Annette Bening, former lovers sighed in relief, while directors sighed in fear, knowing the god of obsessive takes might now aim perfection at home. Yet the legend stands. No one courted danger with a wink so charming. Montgomery Clift arrived as the soft-worded poet of the method era, yet nightmares chewed at daylight. After a late supper at Elizabeth Taylor's house, he crashed his Chevy into a stone wall, jaw shattered, nose bent, nerve damage permanent. Painkillers chased bourbon, and scripts came hemmed with blood from injections gone wrong. On the set of Raintree County, the director found him passed out in a stable, ants crawling on his eyelids. Clift awoke, pleading for one more take, and delivered a performance so raw the crew fell silent. In private, he scribbled, "I am alive, but do not feel it." Close friend Kevin McCarthy described his final years as the longest suicide in history. Clift died at 45, watching The Misfits on television, heart giving out after a decade of pills and guilt. Richard Burton thundered through Shakespeare and tabloids in equal measure, voice like rolling slate across moors. At Oxford, he vowed to drink the Thames dry, and nearly succeeded. When filming Cleopatra, he found a twin flame in Elizabeth Taylor. Their fights shattered mirrors on yachts, then kisses shattered box offices. During one row on the set of The Sandpiper, Burton hurled a champagne bottle that missed Taylor and shattered a camera lens instead. He proposed to her with the line, "If you leave me, I shall have to kill us both." She left him, married him again, left again. He chronicled hangovers in leather journals, once noting that booze is the only mistress who takes more than she gives. 2 days before his death, he wrote, "So ends my odyssey. Bottle empty at last." He died with a paperback of Dylan Thomas beside his bed. Peter O'Toole seemed carved from Celtic mist, wild hair and wilder eyes. Lawrence of Arabia made him a global idol, yet he spent premiere night in a Soho bar, buying drinks for strangers until dawn while ignoring telegrams from the Queen. He once rode a motorcycle down Spanish steps on a dare, shouting that life is meaningless unless flirted with death. Doctors removed most of his stomach in 1976 from drink-induced damage. He celebrated with champagne through a straw. O'Toole claimed to recall only 4 minutes of the 1970s, the rest drowned in scotch. Yet when cameras rolled, he snapped sober, reciting David Lean's dialogue as if inscribed on bone. Critics called it alchemy, turning liquor into poetry. He lived to 81, fragile yet defiant, proving some comets burn slow. Dennis Hopper blasted Hollywood complacency with Easy Rider, then torched bridges behind him. On location for the last movie, he turned a Peruvian village into a drug carnival, mixing peyote tea with nitrous oxide until crew fled. He claimed to hear walls breathing love songs, shot footage without film in the magazine, and proposed to 12 extras in one night. Back in Taos, he barricaded himself with dynamite and mannequins, convinced assassins lurked in juniper bushes. Hopper later laughed. "I did not need a script. I had paranoia." Rehab turned him reflective, but flashes of madness glimmered to the end. His art studio stored canvases painted with shotgun blasts, signature violence captured in acrylic pellets. Paul Mooney pursued roles with monastic obsession. Jailed gangsters invited him to cell blocks so he could memorize their posture for Scarface. For the story of Louis Pasteur, he shut himself in a laboratory, inhaling phenol fumes until makeup artists feared he would drop. Off-set, he stalked dim alleys wearing false beards to test disguises. His wife Bella begged him to slow. Mooney answered that mediocrity is the worst prison. Eye degeneration darkened his world, yet he kept studying Braille scripts until retinal hemorrhage forced retreat. Alone in Montecito, he paced lines from vanished plays, an actor still imprisoned by roles already completed. William Holden epitomized golden masculinity in Stalag 17, but drank like war never ended. He piloted sports cars drunk across cliff roads in Kenya, once barely missing a rhino herd. Director Billy Wilder joked Holden was proof God has a sense of humor and no seatbelt. By 1981, Holden lived in a Santa Monica penthouse enfolded by bottles. He slipped on a rug, cracked his forehead on a teak bedside, and bled through the night. Authorities found him days later, blood dried black, television still glowing with nature footage. The Golden Boy died in solitary silence, proof that sometimes the hero bleeds off stage without applause. Lawrence Harvey oozed charm wrapped round a dagger. Born Zvi Moshe Skikne in Lithuania, he reinvented himself in London boarding houses, vowing to climb by any means. He wooed producers' wives while sneering at their husbands, telling one rival, "I do not ask for permission to exist." Co-stars found him magnetically cruel, his humor slicing. During The Manchurian Candidate, he antagonized Frank Sinatra until the crooner lunged at him. Harvey lit a cigarette and replied, "Cats and kings scratch. Let us proceed." He married society heiress Joan Perry, then bankrupted her trust fund on champagne nights in Paris. At 45, he succumbed to stomach cancer, swearing to friends that death looked boring compared to his life. Sal Mineo felt fame slip like sand after Rebel Without a Cause. Confined by Hollywood's fear of openly queer actors, he took to stage roles and late-night rehearsals in deserted lots. On February evening 1976, he stepped from his Datsun behind his West Hollywood apartment and caught a knife in the heart. The killer vanished. Police speculated rough trade gone wrong. Tabloids howled gay slaying. Yet evidence led elsewhere. Years later, a drifter confessed to a random robbery attempt. Mineo's friends saw darker irony. A man desperate for honest roles died courtesy of the city that once promised him safety. He was 37, still clutching a script for a comeback pilot. Sterling Hayden possessed Viking height and seafarer soul. He joined the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, smuggling weapons to Yugoslav partisans. Hollywood rewarded heroism with contracts he despised. When HUAC subpoenas arrived, he named former communist associates, then drowned in guilt so heavy he wrote, "I sold my soul, that is all." He spent residual checks refitting a schooner and sailed to Tahiti with 4 children, fleeing stardom. Studios sued for contract violation. Hayden laughed and stayed at sea. He returned bearded, storm-eyed, unleashed upon talk shows to condemn the industry as a ring of dwarfs swilling make-believe. His danger lay not in indulgence, but insubordination. Few men burned their bridges and then filmed them sinking from the opposite shore. John Gilbert reigned beside Garbo in silence, but sound arrived like a death knell. Throaty recordings exposed a voice less baritone than fans dreamed. MGM chief Louis B. Mayer mocked him at a banquet, telling Garbo, "I hear he makes love like a pig squeals." Gilbert punched Mayer to the floor. Scripts evaporated. Gilbert sought solace in champagne, waking in strange beds, clutching empty magnums. Friends carried him from clubs as he mumbled that talkies murdered romance. In 1936, at 38, he succumbed to a heart attack after one final spree, with brandy and regret. He left behind a diary with a single entry. "They paid to watch me dream, then took the dream away."